Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Our current session focuses on the idea of access to codes. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand the issues related to this idea. Well, the idea is mainly related to the British sociolinguist Robert Lee Page. He is famous for his studies of variation in creole-speaking communities in Caribbean and Britain. In fact, during his research in these areas, he was intrigued by certain factors. Mostly, he was intrigued by the number of different styles of registers that were in play. What he found was that sometimes, individuals would have a huge variety of languages that they would use. Their linguistic repertoire would be very extensive, which means one individual was able to speak many languages. This also seemed to draw on different parts of their repertoire to respond creatively. So, in different situations, in different contexts, when they would, in different contexts, in different kind of interactions that would happen socially, these people, they would draw on their linguistic repertoire in a very creative way. They would create creative mixes. They would create innovative changes, and they would, use language to the maximum benefit in those social situations. Considering all this situation, what he suggested was that a lot of variation should be seen as acts of identity. What does he mean by acts of identity? He means that out of a vast variety of linguistic repertoire that would have a lot of languages within it for one individual to serve him or her, the person would choose particular languages or a particular language in a particular situation depending upon how does he or she want to create his or her identity. He also argued that thinking of individuals with social and personal goals and aspirations should be at the center of our model of structured heterogeneity. What he meant by this is that people have their goals, people have their aims that they fulfill through linguistic functions. They perform other functions. And for that, they make different choices. And according to him, this idea should be considered at the center of this model. By focusing on a speaker's desire to sometimes identify more with one particular social group or with some other social group, or, making choices in terms of identity affiliations, these are important aspects that make the linguistic choices significant. However, he wanted his framework to be just as good at accounting for speakers who show comparatively less variation or who, do not, show a lot of variation when they speak. In this regard, he pointed out certain things, and the most important idea that he pointed out was access to a variety is very important. What does he mean by this? Now, access to a variety or access to a code, according to him, is very important. Why? Because if you have an exposure to a particular code or a particular language, it is only then possible that it would become a part of your repertoire. It would be in contact with other languages that you speak, and thus it would shape and form your linguistic repertoire in a different way. If you are not in contact with speakers of a particular variety, it will be very difficult for you to learn that particular language. So, for example, if I decide to learn Tongan, even if no access to the speakers to this language I have, still I can learn it. But in that case, it is going to be a very difficult task. I would learn it a hard way. Same is for different styles of varieties. Within one language, there can be different varieties and there can be different styles. And I can completely understand and learn those styles only if I have exposure to the speakers and the users of those varieties and styles. He also suggested that even with access to the code, some things are more likely to be acquired because they are simple, and some things are less likely to be acquired for the simple reason that they are more difficult. We can notice that on certain occasions, certain members use different kinds of vocabularies, and it is quite easy to acquire that vocabulary because, you interact with the users of that vocabulary very frequently. One example is that of, the hip-hop throughout the English-speaking world and even into other European languages. However, when it comes to phonology, phonology is a harder part to acquire. Celicia Cutler undertook a study of a number of white adults and New York City residents, the youth, and she actually identified with reference to this particular hip-hop culture that, a particular hip-hop culture speech style that can be abbreviated as HHSS, it is derived from African American Vernacular English, which, later on I would abbreviate as AAVE. She had certain, findings with reference to that. What she found was all the white hip-hoppers had restructured their linguistic system or the linguistic repertoire so that the diphthong I was realized as a monophthong, widely perceived as characteristic of AAVE, the American, variety. Most of subjects also adopted the low pitch associated with HHSS and AAVE, and most of them had managed to eliminate final and pre-consonantal r sound from their speech. So how all that had happened? This had happened through, contact, and this contact was more focused on, how people, in these certain roles identified themselves. However, other phonological and prosodic features seemed to be harder to acquire. The findings also suggest that access to the code has to be when you are relatively young, that is earlier than teenagers. According to this model of access to the codes, if access to the codes is provided, that is exposure to different codes or languages is provided at a very early stage of life, it is more, it is possible, more possible that it would have an impact and it would influence the language of the speakers. However, this exposure does not have to be, artificial. If it is natural, it is in natural settings, it is in social settings, it is only in those cases that people would learn all this and the contact would be meaningful. In fact, we can relate this to bilingual education in different social systems that different, societies and different countries and states have introduced. At the very early age, when people are given exposure to other languages, they learn them more quickly and they become a part of their repertoire. In our own context, we can think of English that is taught as a lingua franca, actually. So, if the exposure is given at an early age, and if it comes to, kind of social interaction, for example, in the families of the elite class in Pakistan, the natural result is that these children learn it very quickly, and it becomes a part of their linguistic repertoire. So it needs to be through social networks and associated with the playground or at home, meaningful social activities that take place. Only this kind of meaningful access to codes would be helpful.